So my guest tonight has had a similar history, a lifetime on the stage, an actress, singer, dancer, pianist, writer. She's Gia Lisa Krahne, and she has also dealt with the issues of fame and craft. How to be dedicated to your craft and not get sucked into it too much. So how do you devote yourself to your art in a healthy and balanced way? So let's talk to Gia Lisa Krahne. Hello?
Yes.
Is this Gia Lisa Krahne?
That is me, or otherwise known as Gia Lisa Krahne, or Lisa Krahne, or just Gia.
Okay. Can I call you Gia, or do you prefer Gia Lisa Krahne?
Gia will be fine, or anything else we come up with.
Okay, wonderful. Well, it took a bit of time to get to you, but I hope you appreciated all the surveys of art and artistry and training that's required, because I know you have a life that's dedicated to art as well.
Ooh, what an introduction. I should have you do it for me every time. And you hit on the Fosse notes as well. I love it.
My pleasure. And I've been looking forward to the show because I rarely get to show the theatrical side of myself. And
I feel that.
So how have you been able to develop your own artistry and yet maintain a normal kind of life?
I'm not sure that many would call my life normal. I suppose it's been my own personal experience, and whatever that is deemed normal, as that's all you know, and you only get a reflection back from what others tell you. And I suppose I have had many reflections of it being a somewhat extraordinary life. Some might say strange, multifaceted, but as far as the balancing goes, it's always been a balancing act, but I find that following my truest desire, or at any given moment, what is speaking to me most strongly has always served me best, and spending my time there. To presume that it's alwait's been balanced is perhaps taking it too far. I've certainly struggled with that much over the years. It's definitely at a beautiful equilibrium at this point, and I strive to maintain that every day.
Well, it certainly seems like you have achieved something like equilibrium after years of effort.
Yes, that is true. I think that when I was a child, as a performer and an artist, if I could say that, I was extremely driven and a bit obsessive, but it seemed to serve me well as I got to do all the things that I love to do, put many hours into it, lots of sweat and love, and I enjoyed everything I did so much. And as you mentioned, the balance between academia and performing is always a challenge, but both I loved very much. And there was actually a period of time where I was away from performing and creating for the most part, besides writing. And that was very painful. It turned out to be a very challenging time, which I could see in retrospect. But as far as the hard work goes, I never considered it to be work so much because it's what I wanted to do. So how could I call that work? I think that work is often considered something that we must do in order to get a certain result. It's necessary. I have to go to work. I have to do the work. But it puts a different spin on it when you say, I want to do the work. Let me do the work. Give me the work. Here is the work. And to live in that.
Well, the way you put work seems to be more like me saying, let's enjoy practice, training. It's kind of a discipline, in a sense.
Yes. And that is why it's so essential. It's something I've always believed, to find what you really love to do. And that's going to be something that you do well. I think that's one of the things that my grandfather instilled in me, who was a very simple man himself, and he did a job that required a lot of physical labor, and he always said that as long as you're doing what you love, you'll do it well. And he supported me in that way through my life, as did my whole family, no matter what I was doing, and I went through many different stages. But I think that is the key. And that is also, with children, why it's so important to encourage them. I've been teaching children for almost 20 years, and to encourage them to find the thing that they really like. I know that it can be difficult because some of them lack what we might refer to as discipline, especially at a young age, and so it might seem that they're not interested in something when, in fact, they will be. It just takes time for them to kind of tether themselves down and get their focus. But eventually, if we find that one thing that or many things even, that we truly can devote ourselves to, then hopefully we can make our life of it, whatever it takes. And that has a lot of different factors, because that requires you to have a lifestyle that complements that. In other words, if you need a certain kind of security, material security, or partnership, or knowing what you're going to be doing the next day, it can be difficult to be an artist, or many other professions that are less predictable. And so that must be taken into consideration as well, what your base needs are. And so, of course, your choice of work and life has to coincide with that.
Well, that brings me to your childhood, because you're one of the few people I've ever met, aside from like my sister, who has been involved in dance or theater or some kind of art from a very early age. How did you know that you wanted to be in this kind of lifestyle from such an early age?
Oh, boy, if I could answer that. My earliest memory is of being backstage and being on stage when I was about 4 or 5 years old. I still remember the auditorium, and I remember seeing the people out there in the seats and my fellow actors on the stage and waiting to go on stage, and the preparation and excitement, and it was an immediate yes to me. There was no question. It took me, and that's what I wanted to do. At that time, I just said, "Oh, I'm going to be an actress," and no one questioned that or doubted me or instilled the questions. That kind of self-consciousness of oh, well, could that happen? I just figured that's what I could do and would do, and I found that was true as I was doing plays and dancing and playing the piano and singing in concerts and that sort of thing. It was a very easy choice for me. It seemed, I called it a passion at the time. It was something that was impassioned, which is, of course, confused by emotion. And I guess that's where my emotions went. Thankfully, I had that expression of them. And my parents were very supportive, even though there were no artists in my family. I love hearing the story of your family, in fact. I always seemed a bit like an alien, I think, even though they seem to encourage it. I kind of dreamed of having that around me all the time, of having the music around and seeing others in that state as I got older, realizing that could be the case. But it was simply what I did.
Well, I find that very interesting that you didn't have a artistic family, and you became an artist, and here's me. You had an artistic family. I became an academic.
Right.
If we could have switched roles, switched families, I wonder how we would have turned out.
Perhaps in the exact same spot. Because I also went the academic route. I had to come back to this, so you might be in one of your cycles as well. And as that may be the case for me too. I would love to. I still imagine getting a few Ph.D.s in the future. I love the concept of being in the university and enjoyed my experiences there and would love to continue with that. It's all research into human behavior. When I was in school, my degrees are in psychology and was studying medicine, and I don't separate that. I was working in research and science, and scientists are ideally artists and creators. They're inventing and testing theories, and that's the same thing that we're doing, whether we're on the stage or putting words on a page or painting a canvas. We're exploring our own psyche and the reactions of others. And we certainly can't do that alone.
Well, you're definitely right. We can't do it alone. We possibly could have 100 years ago, but I think both academia and the arts are inherently collaborative to some extent. And that's what I love about your life. You aren't just an artist. You're not just an academic. You somehow managed to combine them. And I still can't figure out why you chose your particular academic areas. Why psychology, for instance? Why not political science or history or anthropology? There's physics. I mean, there's all kinds of academic fields. There are all kinds of roles in theater. How do you end up with that particular combination?
Well, actually, you mentioned physics, and when I entered NYU when I was 18, I had the intention of getting a dual degree in physics and math, and I realized in the first year of taking these advanced calculus courses and such that I just happen to be good with numbers, and I enjoy it. I love the fact that a physics equation you can always figure out. I know that there were semesters where I have to admit perhaps I didn't go to lectures. Sometimes I didn't even read a chapter, but you go in and they give you the exam and you can figure out the answer. There are ways of testing. You can go around and you can somehow come around to it. So I actually thought that physics might be a route for me. But I also at that time discovered writing and politics and literature, and I hadn't had the education before to realize I had such a passion for writing and poetry, and I always read. I was a huge reader. I spent much of my childhood by myself with a book under a table, or so that was always there, but I had no idea I could write. No one ever mentioned it to me. I remember the kids that were good writers in school, and I never thought about it really, even though I always wrote. But psychology was something always on my mind because I started reading psychology books, even just starting with those kind of basic self-help type books, and astrology books even. When I was very young, when I was still in elementary school, I would just go to the bookstore and I'd read, and I'd use my allowance money and get these books. So I kind of had a very broad base of basic psychology understanding that fed my experience as a teenager. And, of course, I was always kind of analyzing what I saw around me based on that in myself. So it was only natural for my first semester experiencing the psychology course for that to blossom into other developments. And then I discovered neuroscience, and I was completely fascinated and in love with the brain. I have almost a fetishistic adoration for it, for the brain structures. I love the anatomy of it. I think it's beautiful. I'd like to hold a brain in my hand and touch it. And eventually I did. I mean, that's what I did in my research. So once I started working in research at the medical center, so when I was an undergraduate, I discovered a thirst for healing and touching people through that and medicine. And I also had the idea of traveling as a doctor. I thought that was a perfect way to touch many people around the world, which has always been one of my prime motivations to do anything that I do. And I became very obsessed with that idea, and so that's where my studies were pointed from then on, when I got my undergraduate degree, and then when I went to Columbia University after that. And that continued until I had the rather startling epiphany while I was at Columbia, and that led to a whole other trek back into my on the stage, a dramatic turnaround.
And what was that epiphany? Because up to now, the stories made a lot of sense, but I get the sense that there was like a thunderbolt that struck you of some kind. But
well, it was more that what I didn't mention is perhaps my psychological state during these years. There was a growing neurosis, I think, from the time that I moved to New York when I was 18, that I just kind of it saturated me from being in New York City. I thought that's how people are, the way that New Yorkers are, which is, of course, any number of ways, but you look around a subway car and you can kind of feel everyone's thoughts and everyone's idiosyncrasies. And during that time, I was writing a lot about my experiences of witnessing people and what I was feeling and what I theorized they were feeling and what it was to be human. You know, I was going on my Raskolnikov kick from Dostoevsky, and I fancied myself him and wrote in like fashion. And when I was at Columbia, I started experiencing my first short bouts of depression that kind of struck me out of the blue. Very leaden depression, which was a shocking reverse of my normal state, which had always been very almost manic, high, ecstatic. And this depression led me to question a lot, and I, at some point, trying to think what it was exactly, the moment that it happened, I realized that I really wasn't applying myself to my studies, and I thought, you want to be a doctor, you want to be a neurosurgeon, for God's sake, and you are not studying, you're not even pursuing these topics that you love so much, something that should be very easy for you. And there was a day where I realized that after debating back and forth over the years about theater, I'd go to see a piece, I'd go to see a play, and I would always leave at intermission, either because I was so upset by the performances I saw. I thought, oh my God, this is not what theater is. What are these people doing? Or it's okay, but I should be doing this. Why am I not doing this? Or it was that I was so moved by it that I just couldn't handle it, and it was devastating to me that I was not part of it. And so these had been happening, these moments. And I just had that lightning bolt, thunderbolt revelation, and I went to my advisor at Columbia, and I wrote her a letter, and I said, I'm withdrawing today, and I'm going to devote myself to being an artist full time. You know, it's a bit highfalutin at the time, but that is exactly what I did. And I even remember calling my parents at the moment, and I told them about my decision, and they kind of just said, "Oh, okay, that's nice." And I remember being very upset by that. I expected some sort of a reaction, you know, either that they'd be upset I wasn't going to be a doctor, but they just said, "No, that makes sense. That's what you always wanted to do." And I guess that was some sort of a confirmation in the long run, even if I couldn't see it at the moment. And so then I went on to go to an acting school, which I subsequently left, and continued on from there. I had a much longer 2-year period of depression then. So I hadn't quite solved my problem yet.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And I wonder, why couldn't you have done both? Stayed in school and done acting? That would have been what I guess would be common sense. If you could do, I'm sure there was an arts group at Columbia. There must have been theater majors at Columbia. I mean, at every Ivy League institution, including Harvard, there are opportunities for getting involved in theater, for getting involved in the arts.
Well, I have a number of answers for that. You have a Ph.D., so you know what kind of intensity and time is required at that stage. And surely in medical school, and especially once you're in your residency and internship, and especially for surgery, which I was intending to go into, it does require everything. And I wrote endlessly about this conundrum, thinking, could I do both? And having been driven in a million directions my whole life, which you might attribute to my kind of Gemini mercurial mind, I had to at times kind of rein myself in to just a few focal points. And also I was training with some neurosurgeons kind of under the table at, well, I won't say which medical institution, but and I was given permission to come in to the surgical rooms. And I had the fortune of studying under some magnificent, world-renowned neurosurgeons. And I remember asking one, I wish I could remember his name now, this wonderful Italian neurosurgeon who is renowned for being an elegant surgeon, apparently. And I had the audacity to ask him in the middle of surgery what he'd be doing if he wasn't a surgeon. And he told me he would be an opera singer or a painter. And when he said painter, he meant the house painter. And I found that to be really striking. So getting back to your question, also, I can't imagine just doing it casually. It doesn't seem possible to me. I realize that it requires my whole being as an actor, or especially a dancer. When I came back to dancing, it was my 28th birthday present to myself, kind of an unconventional move to become a professional dancer again at 28 when some ballet dancers are retiring. Not so much these days, but people are taking care of their bodies better. But when I returned, I was in class 6 hours a day because I hadn't danced for all those years because I knew I couldn't just go to one class a week or 2 classes a week. I would be expecting a certain level of excellency to feel my body in prime form. And for the dance itself to reflect that and to feel that. So my return to dance is probably a good example because I was taking class two to three classes a day, every single day, just in order to be able to have the integrity to say I'm a dancer and to be really doing it. It absolutely requires that. And I can't imagine splitting my attention between medicine and arts, performing arts on that level.
Well, I find that very interesting because I've experienced much of the same things that you have. I think I'm Capricorn, Capricorn, but my rising sign is Gemini, I believe.
Mhm.
So pretty every single day, well, at least ever since my conversion to academia in '92, ever since that day, I've had like 100 ideas in my head per day. And it's not even really ideas, it's more like constant questioning of everything around me. Questioning my own identity, questioning of other people's identities, the way the world works, and the questions usually lead to answers, or at least some investigation. And so now, on any given day, I will be thinking of about 5 or 10 different things, and it used to be that would drive me crazy, because back in college, I would have no way of sharing this part of myself. It wouldn't show up in my papers. It would not show up in my conversations with friends. It wouldn't show up in email. I mean, I would just have these ideas. And I kept wondering, when can I share this part of myself? But then I discovered Twitter and figured, okay, so I'll put this part there. And that kind of gave my brain its excess space, so I could do that for an hour, then go back to doing my structured academic stuff. But the issue for me is, I think you're right. You have to both have some structure with whatever you're doing, and have a kind of intense, passionate commitment to whatever you love. If you want to do it well, at least. There are certain things you can do well without having a passionate commitment, like, friendship. You can easily do friendship pretty well without being without being intensely devoted to just one person. Same thing with traveling. You can easily travel to a city and just, go through, pass through in a few days, and meet certain requirements. But I think with dance, and especially intellectual subjects, it does require an intensity and commitment, just because there's so much there. There's so much content for you to absorb and also produce. And if you don't have the intensity and the passion, you're just not going to be able to rise to the level that you yourself want to be at.
Yes, it's curiosity. I think that's what you're speaking to. And I think that there's a quote by Samuel Johnson that says that curiosity is one of the permanent characteristics of a vigorous mind, and is that's the questioning, and that's what's required certainly for research, and also to be able to make decisions in life. If you're not asking questions yourself and you're just going on the questions that are out there, how are you going to find what's really important to you, what is significant? And we try to answer those questions every day, even in all of our relationships, our relationship to ourselves and the strangers we walk by on the street.
I think you're exactly right about that. There's a strong element of curiosity in every single intellectual person's life. And see, I didn't have that curiosity when I was a hippie kid. I did want to know what my world was like, but I was much more concerned about getting home every day to watch my favorite TV show, or see my favorite movies, or reading my comic books. I mean, I didn't have curiosity. But once I decided to become an academic, I had to go through this sort of intense reconstruction phase of my own personality, because I wasn't a hippie anymore. I had to figure out, okay, what am I going to be doing as an academic? What is that even like, to be an academic? And it's sort of like going from the Earth to the Moon. It's a completely new environment, different circumstances, And it requires a total commitment to just figure out what the new situation is like. And so my brain just kind of woke up and said, okay, as long as you're reinventing yourself, let's reinvent the world as well. And I had to start studying some of the great masters of the past, like Albert Einstein and Pablo Picasso, to figure out, okay, so if I'm going to be entering this academic space, how do I do it well? And I figured, well, if I'm going to be an academic, then I want to be the best possible academic I can be, and that means being a super genius, a polymath who knows everything. And so I set myself on this regimen of 20 years of obsessive compulsive studying, where like even to this day I wake up and I don't eat, I read. By eating, by reading the news or reading books, I feel full. And then after I finish reading, I can eat because I've got my mind sort of ordered. And I can start to put physical food into my body versus just intellectual food. But that's just me, and I've just sort of come to terms with the fact that I am an obsessive compulsive person. I have an extreme personality, but I've only had that for the past 20 years as an academic. Before that, I wasn't extreme. I was quite relaxed, quite fun-loving, easygoing, and I might have had questions, but I didn't really investigate them to the extent I do now. But I've realized that this is kind of the requirement of this line of work or this lifestyle. If you are in the arts, then an inquisitive, questioning, investigative mind or spirit is what is required. If only because you have to at least figure out how to take a new approach, to painting or to photography or to dance or to acting or to poetry. You're looking for your own angle on it, your own innovation.
Yes.
And that requires lots of intense focus right there.
Yes, I think that these questions are there's different forms of questioning because the questions are often what drive people insane as well. And finding the focal point or the calmness in the center of that is a great challenge. We have to be able to separate the voices that are kind of haphazardly asking questions and leading us off track from the more salient and powerful questions. And that requires a certain silence to allow those questions to arise. And I'm sure you can relate to this. To somehow have either a funnel or some place that you come back to that tethers all of your questions, or if there is an essential question guiding all of these. And this is what we spend our whole life trying to come to. And I find that in teaching, I hear these questions every day from people that are seeking some peace in their mind and in their hearts. And at the same time, really wanting to know the answers to why they're here and how they can do what they want to do. It's very simple. To just be able to follow our not only desires, but what it is that we want to do, because that's not what people normally do. It's very difficult to do the things that you know you should do, not what you're told you should do. it's easy to say, I want to do such and such, I'm going to do it. But to be able to design your life and point yourself in that direction and actually wear the skin of that and be that is the challenge that we all face every day.
Well, I love the fact that you're essentially becoming an existentialist philosopher on the show. On the spot, quoting Nietzsche. I mean, what you'll be probably quoting Sartre and Kierkegaard next. But you see,
watch out.
I know. I bet you have lots of quotes ready. But that's what is interesting about you, because I've met plenty of other academics who are not existential philosophers. I've met plenty of theater people who just go from one role to the next, memorize lines here, take a part there. Somehow you have a bigger personality than either academia or theater allows. I'm wondering how that happened, because I have never met someone like you who's been involved in both and is asking the kinds of existential questions that you're asking.
Well, I think there's a certain integration that is required, and it very much depends on your own constitution, because some people do not even see the question of what needs integrating. And that's the first question to ask. Where are the dualities? Where are the separations? Where do I feel confused, or where I'm not being myself? Those are the things to really look at and start to see if they can be brought together, those polar differences, and seeing where they coincide. And where you are in the center of that, you're embodying all of that. They're not separate, because you are the one that is experiencing each of these things. And I recently had this conversation, actually, with my partner about my yoga teachings, my meditation teachings, and my theater work and teaching, about them being, whether they're two separate avenues or not, whether they should be held separately and conducted as different either businesses or focuses. And I said, I can't separate it. Maybe someone else can, or from the outside you can. Objectively you can. On paper you can. But it's simply what you do in a day's time. All of these things. It may be that you're on stage at some point, an actual stage. Then you're on the stage on the street. You're just walking down the street. You're then at home with your family. You're being a father. You're fulfilling all of these different roles, but they're not separate, because you're the one who is enacting them. And what is required is you to always be present and be there. And there's a story being told, but I don't think we have to be concerned about that story. And people often get caught up in that, especially the way that society has progressed so quickly in recent years technologically. You know, we are bearing everything at any given moment. We're online. We're live. We're posting our statuses. We're being photographed and filmed at any given moment and recorded, and we're aware of that. And telling our stories, we have all these stories from our lives of who we've been and how we got there and who we think we are. And it gets very baffling to try to put all of this together to tell our mythology, especially if we hold on to it too tight. Because as you move through life, it changes. Your perspective changes. You realize things, and you have to allow your stories to change, as it's always evolving. And our perspective is shifting as we're becoming, and we're becoming more of ourselves and more of all of these things. And they become even more present then and more apparent. So people looking in can see these different discrepancies or parts of a person from the outside. And yet it can all be experienced as one continuous stream, that there is no difference. For instance, with meditation, now I'm meditating and now I'm not. What is the difference? Why can't it all be one meditation? There are no requirements. Now I'm acting. Now I'm performing. Oh, wait, now I'm not performing. What's the difference? You're still a person who is there, who is saying words or moving or not, and feeling something. It's all one. And our mind has the ability to pick that apart. That's true. We can see the differences, the opposites, what could be an opposite. We can analyze all of that, and that's fun. We can debate that even. But when we feel the polarities too much in our being and flip-flop from side to side with it, that's where we suffer in the middle of that and don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying perfectly, since I didn't actually experience duality, since duality implies two. I experienced thousands of fragments of myself every day.
Yes.
Mainly because every day I would wake up and read an article, usually 5 or 10 articles, and from those articles I would read, I would build my personality. And then write an essay based on that. And then after writing an essay per day for 5 straight years, so it's like 365 times 5, I had thousands of essays, all parts of my personality, all floating about somewhere in cyberspace. And one of the things I think you are correct to mention is this issue of Facebook and Twitter and all the posts, and the need to integrate all that. What I find really compelling about your perspective is you do need to have some sort of unified whole with all of those separate things. And that unified whole is what I've been trying to construct for the past 20 years. Because if I didn't construct that, I would have no sense of self-awareness. I would have no idea why I did anything I did. And I would pretty much be blind, flailing about every day, acting instinctively instead of with purpose. And I just couldn't tolerate living like that. And this is one of the things, you're right, is recent in our society. Back in the early 2000s or late 90s, when reality TV was just getting started with Fiverr, before Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, there were people wondering, so what happens when everyone gets famous? Because we were all thinking of like EdTV or Survivor or Big Brother or MTV's The Real World. What happens when every person is famous? And the answer was, when everyone's famous, well, then we all have these personas that we're trying to construct. And we're all living these personas all the time. So where is the real you in all of that? Is there a real you at all behind this persona you're presenting to everyone else around you? And that really did worry me, because coming from a hippie culture, I was wondering, so what if everyone acts as if they're on TV all the time and there is no authenticity, there is no relationship, there is no true passion or love, dedication or commitment to anything? It's just like flipping the channel. Or the Etch-a-Sketch candidate like Mitt Romney. You just change your mind, you change your life, go on to the next activity without any thought of what you just did. And that does worry me, because if you learn nothing from what you just did, if it's just going from one role to the next without pausing to think if there's any theme connecting them, then everyone's a fragment. Everyone is just thousands of fragments all over the place. And that loses the spiritual essence that might be there.
Yeah, I think that the building of constructs is certainly something that gets us in trouble, trying to conceive of ourselves as any particular thing. Of course, we can be imagined and imagine ourselves as anything in any given moment, and we do all the time, and we have all kinds of fantasies in our head as we walk down the street. But constructs crumble, and they don't exist, really. They are something that we created with our mind. And what is out there that is a true construct? It's a structure that cannot be questioned. A building, an organization, they can all serve different purposes, and they're not necessarily what their mission is to be. And as a human being, I think the more essential motivation is to just be able to be within all of this, to inhabit the different concepts that arise, that we see appear in front of us in our lives, to go ahead and open that door that's there and to become what has just been asked of you, to step into that role and simply respond to it and bring what you can to it and see what arises from that. And that quiets the self-consciousness that can be very restricting and alarming, that constantly says, who am I now? What is this? Am I this? Am I allowed to be this? Is this okay? And the intuitive response is arguably the best response, because we have intuitive intelligence. We naturally will just live and be as our animals and children and babies. It's like swimming. You are thrown in the water and you move around, you flap around as you do in life, and eventually you learn to float or swim, or sometimes you get some mouthfuls full of water, and then you figure out what to do with that. You figure out what to do with your circumstances and experiences, and maybe you tell some stories along the way about what has happened to you, and you learn something from it as you do that, as you share it with your friends, and you reflect on it in a different way as you tell your stories, and that, in essence, affects your behavior going forward, as it shifts your perspective and it shifts your entire being.
So I'm wondering, in your case, you seem to have found a lot of different ways to shift your being. I mean, you've taught meditation, yoga, healing, tantra, and Vedic studies. I mean, you haven't just been involved in theater, but the living theater, the alchemical theater.
Yes.
It seems like you're using art to fundamentally question human existence versus just going from one role to the next in one show or another.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, do you fit in with the normal sort of stereotype of a New York theater person? I mean, do you spend most of your days reading scripts, trying to find out the next role, looking at, talking to your manager, your agent, and so on? Or are you much more interested in creating a fusion of sort of theater, art, and spiritual practice?
Well, I would say I fit in the sense that I'm as much another actor and creator in the city as anyone else is, and we all kind of come together and meet each other at different points in our work and careers, and we either find ourselves drawn to each other and to working with each other and find ourselves meeting again and again, or are on completely different tracks. And I'm fortunate enough to have my own home with the Alchemical Theater and also the dance company I work with, General Mischief Dance Theater, which I'm a dancer with. And these are places where...
Wait, General Mischief Dance Theater?
Yes. You like that?
You didn't describe that in the bio you sent me.
Ah, yes. It's a wonderful little company run by Emily Vartanian, and its mission, which it always accomplishes, is to bring fun to the audience, a joyful experience, and it is achieved by having people flying through the air. There are people on bungees, on silks. We have different kinds of dancers and athletic performers. And the shows are all feel-good shows, which is kind of unusual, especially for angst-filled dance companies these days. And there's a core of us that are all Fosse-trained dancers. So we have a little game that we play, the shell game, with a red hat you have to follow through the dance that is passed or misplaced many times. So by the end of it, it's rather challenging to actually point out the hat to get the prize, whatever that might be. So that's what General Mischief is.
So it's not improv. This is actually dance.
No, it's definitely not improv. Especially if you can imagine people on bungees, they will crash into each other if they're in the wrong place, or into the stage for that matter. if they're in the wrong place at the wrong time.
It sounds like a mixture of circus and dance.
Yeah, it's a little bit of that. It has the, I guess you could say, acrobatic element to it. But what it is it's a very contagious feeling. When you watch people flying and jumping on stage, everyone wants to do it. You sit in your seat and you say, wow, but you also say, that looks fun, because we're not directed to mask our enjoyment of what we're doing for the most part. So it's that feeling of flying and freedom is passed on to the audience. It's a beautiful thing.
Well, I'm having fun just imagining it.
Yes.
But that seems to be a bit of a distance from the living theater and the alchemical theater. Can you just describe what those are like? What is the mission of the living theater and the alchemical theater?
Well, the living theater is, of course, run by Judith Malina, and her work is basically inspired by the idea that the peaceful anarchist or pacifist revolution can still occur in society and among the interaction between the actors and the audience. And there are many actors around the world who have worked with the living theater over the last 50 years, who are, everyone's part of the family once you've been there. And the alchemical theater is a creation of my partner, Carlo Altomare, who started it in 1981 when he branched off from the living theater himself after working with them and Judith and Julian Beck for many years around Europe. And then he started his own company in the East Village. And our work is primarily driven by this idea that the actor is more the center of the theater and the human experience than necessarily the playwright and the narratives and all of these other things that are often driven into the idea of what theater is. The art of acting, that there is really an enormous need for our actors to take that very seriously as they live in every part of their lives, to devote themselves to that, to what that is. That it's not just what we see, what we have seen. There has to be a new form of that. There's always new forms emerging over the years. And there has to be a thirst for that it's not just the typical enacting, pretending to be that we often see or have been shown over the years on television and in theater and film, that there's much more to that in the live venue of a theater, that you have the opportunity to really connect and engage with other human beings in those moments. The others on stage, yourself, and that the audience members are as much a part of it as you are. We can't do it alone in a room. The monologues, for instance, that people practice alone in a room, it's you're just kind of talking to yourself, you're what you do in your head all day. And what is that exactly? Why there needs to be someone receiving that, another energy or life or emotion to engage with, a reason to say those words. I'm going a little bit sideways here, but get me back on track.
Oh, no, you have my permission to go wherever you want.
Okay.
And what I actually find interesting about what you're saying is I clearly remember my AP English class in high school.
Yes.
My English teacher was a devotee of Shakespeare, and she drilled Shakespeare into us, I think the entire year, or at least the first semester. And she described her own experiences of going to study Shakespeare for her master's in England, and going into these very enclosed theatrical spaces where you're almost right up there with the actor on the stage itself. And I didn't encounter that kind of thing in the 20th century until I studied Samuel Beckett. A lot of Beckett's plays, that sort of existential angst that's characterized in, say, Waiting for Godot. It's also very similar there. It wants to make the audience part of that maelstrom of self-questioning and self-doubt and not knowingness that is itself.
Yeah, I think in that particular example, it's much easier for the audience to enter into it because the energy is very palpable in that waiting, in that, what do we say, activity of waiting, that it's, the audience seems to be in the same position as the actors on the stage. They all feel that same sense of, what is it, dread or curiosity, or it's a feeling that's almost in the air of the space of the theater.
You're exactly right about that. And that reminds me of some of the other existentialist authors I read in college. Pirandello, for instance, 6 Characters in Search of an Author. I mean, I've always been drawn to absurdist theater because part of the way I think is I take a simple idea, a simple observation, and I push it as far as I can until it gets so absurd that it breaks. And then I just wonder, is there any example I can find of that absurdity in real life? And if I can find that, if I can find it in real life, then I just trace the steps to go from normalcy to absurdity.
Did you watch the debates?
I did not, but yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. And
life is absurd, my friend.
It is indeed. And I didn't really even realize this until I started to read about my favorite period of art, which is Paris in the 20s, where you had Gertrude Stein and Pablo Picasso and Ernest Hemingway all there in the same crowd. And I've always
Sure.
I would love to go back to that place, but I also realized what I'm getting at. Here was Paris after World War I, and the Great War had destroyed pretty much all the ideals of the 19th century, left the artistic community with a feeling that the entire world has gone insane, and so art must reflect that insanity. And so you get the birth of absurdist theater. And so, 6 characters, 6 of an author, 1921. And this is that exact period of absurdist theater where a lot of artists have said, life is crazy. And so we're going to push the boundaries of everything that we can and make everything insane. And I just find that to be compelling because if you look at the world today, it's not that much different. We just think it's an insane world. I mean, we have insanity confronting us with terrorism, with the internet, too much information, social media, everything public all the time, no privacy. I mean, it's like the rules of everything being rewritten every day. And I just figured, okay, if the rules are being rewritten, what are the new rules? And the only way to figure out the new rules is to break the old rules, see where they lead.
Yeah, that's true, and that was, I think, always one of the attractions to theater, that one comes to expect that something absurd can happen, at least, that there's always a possibility that something unexpected will happen, whereas in life, people didn't always see that possibility, or don't always see that it's always the same thing. But it seems to be that that's not at all the case. If your eyes are open when you're walking down the street, especially living in New York City, that you're constantly barraged with unbelievable people and situations as you move through your life. And I think that is even one of the reasons that people are New Yorkers and are perhaps even addicted to that, to knowing that that's going to happen every day.
I can understand that and even appreciate it, especially because just looking at the kinds of movies that are being produced nowadays, whether comedy, drama, horror, romance, etc., they seem to be trying to stretch every kind of boundary that there is.
Yeah, people are drawn to that. They want that in their lives, and they don't quite know how to get it, how to experience it. It's like they're often kind of acting the roles out or pretending to have a wild experience or an extreme experience when they're not really connecting with it, and they so want to, and that's where art and theater, being provocative and pulling that experience out in people, because they feel safe enough to have the experience when they're sitting in a theater, in a dark theater, and they're watching someone else. They're not being watched. And so then they're able to join with the people on the stage, and also the feeling of their neighbors sitting next to them in the seats, and be moved by something. And that experience is invaluable because it gives people that sense of possibility, that they can feel these things. I can't tell you how many people a week come to me and tell me that that's the one thing they want, to just be able to feel themselves and experience their lives like it's really happening, to experience their bodies, that your body, how startling is that, to not have the experience of this thing that you live in, that your mind is in, that you're walking around in, you're moving, you're looking at your hand, you're moving it, but somehow you feel disconnected from it. Why is that? And that is a question that you can sit with and try to answer in a very tangible way. You feel your fingers on your palm. You watch your hand move, and you think, how am I moving my hand? You touch your other arm with your hand, and you feel the skin there, and there's a reaction, and that's just you by yourself having that natural reaction to touch, to physical touch. And that can be extended to the natural reaction we have when we meet someone, or when someone says anything to us, that's whether it hurts us or delights us, to feel that we're allowed to have that experience, that it's okay. And people are drawn to watching movies and coming to the theater because they get to see people having those reactions, and they're allowed to watch, and they're allowed to experience it with them. When we're in our lives, sometimes we think that we are not, it's not okay for us to have experiences with people and to watch them, to observe them, to be voyeuristic in our lives. And yet we are stifling ourselves in withholding this because we don't think it's going to be acceptable, our reactions. And even our thoughts, that they should be harnessed in. And when you come to the theater and see people doing extreme things, or simply having a real emotional reaction to something, that is very stimulating for us to see that, and that's what people want to have, I think.
I agree. It seems to be a necessary part of the human experience, given the background necessity of survival. Having jobs and doing routine things a day just to make sure that we had food. My wife and I have gone to theater quite a bit, and that was kind of new to me, actually. Before I got married, I didn't go to theater. But I think I didn't go to theater before I got married because I've always been, like you, a writer, or more precisely, a thinker. So writing is just an expression of it. And I've always held the dream world and the literary world to be the same thing. And the writing should just be a way of synthesizing those things. So it would be very easy for me to just stay at home and read books every single day and sleep and dream, and I would be quite content just doing that.
Yes.
But my wife really loves theater and especially dance, and so we would often in New York City, while she was in medical school there, go to different performances. So we would go to off-Broadway. I think we went to see the Blue Man Group once. We also went to see a musical that was recommended to us called I Love You, You're Perfect, Now Change.
I saw that actually down by Union Square.
Exactly. It's quite a fun show. And for both of us, she was in medical school, and as you very well know, a medical school can be extremely pressurized, and so she needed a break from all the intensive studying. I needed a break from my own intensive studying, and so theater offers that break. It offers that physical suspension of disbelief that only your dreams really offer when you're asleep. And I think that's why we're drawn to it. The same reason why we're drawn to movies, TV shows, and even just books.
Yeah, it does give you a couple of hours of meditation, really. And I think that you happen to find this in your own way, in your reading and your writing, this state that you link into that is a meditation of sorts. That's integrating the information you're taking in from the outside world with your own thoughts. And that is all we're trying to do with the tools of meditation in the long run, to be able to live our lives and integrate our outer experience with what's happening inside. And when people sit in a theater, they are able to dream a little bit, to kind of sit and see where their thoughts go, to unprovoked, or to not have to think about anything in particular, do anything. It's not so often that people get 2 hours of quiet time where they're not supposed to be doing anything in particular, and they're actually sitting in their what could be a meditative posture, sitting in a chair, upright, fairly still for the most part. And that's a wonderful opportunity, especially with the stimuli of watching people on stage. And your mind can go anywhere it wants during that. And hopefully there's something there that is engaging enough to take you along with it and perhaps spur some new questions or thoughts. Hopefully it does. And you know the difference. That's how you know the difference between good theater and bad theater. If you are sitting there and thinking about your grocery list, that's probably not a reflection on you, but on what's happening or not happening on the stage. It should be thoroughly interesting to watch someone really engaged in the moment and in their body and with you, who really wants to be with you as the actor, that they realize that it is a huge obligation to have people come and sit there in order to watch them. So that already creates an enormous heightened sense in both of you, that there is some expectation there, although you may not know exactly what that expectation is, but for something to happen. And there are many times when you go to see something that it does not hold your interest. I'm sure you had this experience as well, for whatever reason. And maybe you think that you're just bored or overly thinking, when in fact that's probably not the case. There should be so much to watch just in that human being behaving in front of you.
Well, in general, you are right about that. I'm a bit of a different case because one of the reasons I describe my hippie background in the beginning of every show is because I spent approximately 8 years bored. No TV, no computers, barely even any radio, just having books around me. And one of the things that I vowed to do in school, and especially when I became an academic, was to never be bored again. So I have trained myself to be in any situation, and even if my environment is not changing at all, my mind is my own theater, basically. And I use what's going on the stage, or just even right down the hall for me if I'm in the classroom or at work, and that provides a stimulus into my own creative process. Or, as we tend to say about people, the people aren't boring, not the events. So if you're bored, it's because of you, not because of what's going on outside. And that's because you've been sort of trained by the culture to be bored. If you aren't getting constant stimulation from TV and radio and books and everything else. So I quite prize an active mind, which goes back to the inquisitiveness that we talked about earlier. But even
can you answer this question about what boredom is? I remember using the word when I was a kid, but I think it usually just meant that I was annoyed by something. At this point, and for years, I can't fathom being bored. It just seems that there aren't enough hours in a day, and it's annoying to me that I have to sleep for a couple of hours.
Yeah, I have the same annoyance. Boredom is really, it's kind of a misnomer, actually, because there's always something happening, whether inside of you or outside. And so there's never any cause for boredom. What boredom really describes, from what I've read, especially in the neuroscience literature, is the powerful capacity of your brain to learn and adapt quickly to anything. So the activity of learning and adapting is quite fun. When you're learning, adjusting, changing, adapting, evolving, making any kind of transition or transformation, you're having fun. Therefore, you're not bored. But since your brain is so quick and powerful at that activity, your environment will not provide the constant stimulation that the brain needs to always change, learn, adapt, and transform. And so you're going to be bored only because you're so smart. Your brain just...
and that's what we're telling ourselves.
Exactly. So because your brain works so well, you'll go into an environment, you'll size up the situation right away, you'll know what to do right away, and you'll satisfy your basic needs instantly. And then you'll be bored because you've already done that. There's no need to change anymore because you've already done your job.
The requirements have been satisfied. Now I've lived. I'm done.
Exactly. And the thing is, we live in a society where most of the tasks of survival are now done very easily. We're not living in mountains anymore or in jungles where we have to go kill animals for our food or raise them on a farm. Those are very, very hard, challenging days, and if you ever try to do that, you'll cease boredom instantly because it's just so hard to survive in those harsh conditions. But in a place like New York City, your survival is guaranteed very easily. So you get bored pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think it may actually be a functioning, a mechanism of a certain lethargy of the mind and body to perhaps contradict the neuroscience literature, which I actually haven't read about boredom, but which is a funny statement unto itself. If the mind, I'm thinking about yawning right now, which I have read theories about, besides the obvious, the brain isn't getting enough oxygen, but that animals would yawn when they're getting tired and they're feeling sleepy in order to show their fangs to let possible predators know that they have them, even though they're perhaps about to sleep or they're going to rest and be less aware. So here's my fangs before I do that. And people, when they yawn, are perhaps, this is quite a stretch, but but that they're not just trying to pick up on the slack of how much oxygen they're taking in, but they're feeling a bit tired or less able to respond to their environment, so they're showing their fangs, so to speak, in that moment to say, no, I'm still here, I'm awake, I'm okay, I just yawned, see? Something's happening in me. But that's another thing that people do struggle with, is feeling unable to make the moves that they need to move, to think, to be quick enough to be on top of things. And the boredom indicates that there's a heaviness, a weight in them that's not allowing the flow of thoughts and energy and movement to take them from one thing to another.
Well, I like your approach, and fortunately, I do remember lots of the reading I did back about 10 years ago when I was really studying this stuff.
Yeah.
Your approach is correct for animals, but humans are not animals, so for us it's a bit different. Yawning constitutes a transition signal for the body.
Mm.
So the way boredom works in the human brain is, since your brain needs constant stimulation in order to stay awake, whenever the stimulation stops, your brain goes automatically into energy conservation mode, because it just takes so much energy for the body to sustain that brain. And so the moment your environment stops changing, your body basically says, okay, shut down, sleep, and let's repair the brain, or let's get the brain improved. And so most of the activity shifts from watching changes in your environment to making changes happen in you. So instead of having to see outside, you instead start having daydreams and all these fantasies, and the brain just sort of goes inside. It becomes internal. And all that yawning does is tells your body, okay, shutting down, we're going to sleep now, until such a time as the environment requires us to wake up. And I think with animals, animals have much more of a need to protect themselves from the environment.
Sure.
Whereas humans, look at humans. We don't have feathers or fur. We do have fangs, but only the canines for eating meat. We can't use the fangs to actually tear flesh like animals can. So humans are the most defenseless creatures in the entire animal kingdom. You put a human in a jungle without clothing, without a gun or a spear or a knife, that human will die in about 24 hours. Because we're just so ill-equipped to survive on our own.
This is true, but I believe that there are still some extremely old reactions in human beings that cannot be accounted for by our present environment, which you're indicating that is, we are completely, we don't have such a need to have these defenses, but even the pain mechanism, that people have such extreme reactions to pain and the sensation of it, that it causes such suffering just from this physiological reaction that the brain interprets as scary because something harmful might happen to your being. when pain is something that can be handled and the stream of reactions is not so different from sensations of pleasure. And yet, for the most part, people respond very negatively to pain, and they don't, physical pain I'm talking about, and they don't want to have it. And my very primitive theory about this is simply that it used to be the case that when you were injured or hurt by something, that you were in danger of dying. I mean, that's, of course, the fundamental fear we have, or of having a stronger illness or disability from it. But even in the case of any kind of injury or painful experience we can have, in most cases we're going to be fine. It's going to be over. Even a visit to the dentist, that sort of a thing. And yet there's something in us that doesn't connect that logic. Although I'm sure there are many people that would say that what I'm saying is illogical.
Well, actually, I think what you're saying is very logical. And to me, it just means that humans have made such a rapid and radical transition to civilization.
That's true.
That our bodies haven't adapted to it.
Yeah.
2,000 years have elapsed since we've moved from like the Bronze Age, or the Stone Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age, up to the present. Life used to be very hard, and as I tell a lot of my students, even just 150 years ago, most women died in childbirth. Most of the advances we now take for granted in medicine didn't exist. There was no anesthesia. People lived to be about age 35, maybe 40 at most, and they were killed often by disease, war, and childbirth. So up until about the year 1910, we had at most 1.1 billion people on the planet, because war, disease, hunger, starvation, all those other things killed us quite often.
Yeah.
It wasn't until we got oil and mass education and industrialized food that the population just skyrocketed. So now we're at nearly 7 billion. That's a 6 billion increase in 100 years. And it's only possible because of all this technology and education we have. That's a huge transformation in both the planet and our lives. And
yes.
We're still stuck, I think, in the year 500 AD or 500 BC. We haven't evolved that much.
Yeah, our minds still haven't caught up to realize that the current feeling or circumstance will change momentarily. That we think that any emotion we're having or physical experience is going to last. We still don't connect the very rational and experiential revelation that it will always change. Any pain we're in will go away and become something else. It may not become joy immediately, but it will shift. And we have the technology now to make that so, and should have the understanding to follow that. But I also acknowledge that it's a difficult understanding to come to. It takes a lot of practice and wisdom to integrate that and trust that and really know that in your being. And that is to say that it's going to be okay.
Well, that actually connects two of the themes that I think we've developed for the show. The first is the unity of spirit that you've alluded to. You know, the need to have an integrated sense of self, unified experience. And that is definitely one of the legacies that I carry with me from my hippie culture. You know, this idea that, you know, why should you have to go to church to be spiritual? You can be spiritual outside of church. And I just took it to a lot of those kids. Why do I have to, you know, do yoga practices to do yoga? Why do I have to pray physically in order to pray? Why do I have to lay down and meditate? I can meditate all the time. And so I've tried to structure and discipline my mind so I can do that. Because I do value that experience of feeling a heightened sense of awareness, internal pleasure, insight, peace. All those things should come from meditation and yoga. I want to be able to do that even when I'm on the bus, teaching class, walking to school.
Yes, that is if there is a goal to it, that is what it is, to live your yoga, your union. The goal is never to be able to do a particular asana or get your leg over your head. That has no meaning, unless it has the complementary development of the flexibility of your mind, which often comes along with that as you increase your bodily flexibility. And it's about how you are able to function in the world and in yourself to be able to have the experiences that you value most, which is what you're speaking to right now.
Exactly. And I think that's the gift of both spirit and technology to keep you physically safe enough where you can train your mind and your body to be able to reach those heightened states of awareness and peace. But that's kind of where the paradox comes in. And it goes to the flip side of, you know, talking about the role of theater and movies and television in our lives. One of the things I've talked about on the show in the past is the fact that I'm a big fan of horror movies. I've been watching horror movies since I was about 8 or 10 years old. Zombies, vampires, werewolves, slasher films, you name it. And one would think, you know, why would I watch those when, you know, here I have this hippie culture and, you know, I'm a big exponent of peace and joy. But I think one of the things that has really become a problem for humanity is that as animals, in a sense, we feel most alive when we're running from fear or from danger. When we're confronting conflict, war, disaster, that's when we just wake up and say, have to act now. And that's the things we most remember. I mean, you barely remember the times when you were in a library reading, but you remember very clearly your reaction to a terrorist attack or to your house burning down. I mean, that's very clear to you because your body just, it became like electric. You're very active, very aware in that moment. And it's because we have this legacy as human animals of only acting because of danger. And so most men in the past would seek out that danger by going to war. Now they seek it out by going to play sports. It's just civilized forms of war. Or by playing video games, virtual reality war. So we have changed so rapidly in our environment that our bodies just have not got used to the fact that we have peace and prosperity as our normal conditions.
It's shocking, isn't it?
It is. It's amazing that we just haven't gotten used to the fact that we can now take living for granted. Living to the age of 70, 80, even now 100 because of modern technology. That's just so fast.
But I don't think people have that experience very often of recognizing that there is peace and prosperity. I don't think that the gratitude and recognition is prevalent in most people's daily lives. That it's more a litany of the issues that we face each day in ourselves and our family and work lives and what we're trying to do. That the problem of existing or surviving, I should say, has been transmuted into the problem of just being able to be. It's still a question of living, of how we're living and how well we're living. And it doesn't seem to matter so much if it's that we're struggling to just have food or to not be attacked by a predator, or it's that we're struggling to want to live and to be content. That they're only different forms of each other, and we feel the same emotions from them, the same level of fear or anger or relief, despite the actual stimuli.
Well, that's what I mean when I say the brain does a very, very good job. Brain encourages survival, and the way the brain does that is essentially playing a movie for you, showing the worst-case scenario for everything. And since the brain is so capable of presenting a very believable worst-case scenario, you believe it, and you act based on that.
Yeah, but see, you mentioned that this is the exact question that generally immediately calms me. In any given moment, you might find me asking myself, what is the worst thing that could possibly happen? And I go through the possibilities, and I suddenly can't find anything to be upset about. Even in the ultimate worst-case scenario, and that would be death, I suppose. What if I die, or if there's an accident of that magnitude? And, well, my acceptance of that or feeling about that would be a whole other show, I suppose. But in the case of any of the other possibilities, it seems like suddenly it's not that bad. That the fight or flight response is pacified, that it's okay to just be there and withstand all of the possibilities. So that's the other side of the worst-case scenario coin.
Well, you're exactly right about that. And that's why I mentioned the worst-case scenario, because I severed that part of my personality 20 years ago.
You severed it? Wow. Was that a surgical procedure?
I just...
an internal one.
Yeah, it was it was a way of saying to myself, well, the conditions were kind of extreme anyway. I mean, there I was in a public high school that was in a city overrun by gangs and drugs, and I was saying to myself, I will never survive this. And I was thinking of the worst case scenarios for myself: death, killed in gang fight, killed by a drive-by, addicted to drugs, ending up homeless. I mean, that was what my brain produced for me. So those were my worst fears. And they seemed quite plausible, because every time I turned on television at night, it was, here's another drive-by, here's a gang rumble, here's a kid who's been killed by guns or drug overdose. So I was afraid for my life. And based on that, that's why I became an academic. It was pure survival. So initially, when I made that transition, I thought, this is impossible. I will never be able to escape my environment, but I have to try. And so the more my mind would produce these worst-case scenarios, the more I had to convince myself it's not possibility, it's probability. So even though I might end up dead or in jail because of this environment, I have to believe that the probability matters more. I might die tomorrow, yes, but is it probable? Well, no. That's like maybe a 1% chance. There are gangs around me, but is it probable that I will be killed in a crossfire? Well, if I stay away from them, no. So stay away from them. And based on that extreme level of fear, I basically shut down my life. I mean, I don't know about in your case, like you described yourself, reading books as a child and under tables. With me, it was just end everything in my life and just study for 2 straight years, which wasn't exactly how I wanted to start it, but I didn't see any choice. So I had a trailer next to my dad's house, and I would just go there after school every day and spend the next 12 hours straight studying. Then go back to school, take tests, do homework, and go back home, study some more. No friends, no family, barely any television, no video games, no comic books, just everything that I had been doing, I stopped. Because I was afraid that if I did that stuff, the next stop would be jail or death. So fear was my biggest motivator for a long time. And the only fear was to just say, well, it's unlikely that those things will happen, and figure the more I'm an academic, the less likely those things would happen.
And that's why it's such a positive ability to be able to recognize what those true fears are, because we need to be able to design our lives in a way that we can minimize those, whatever they are for us, because it's different for every person what their real primal fear is. And if we can somehow set up our life in a way, even if it takes something extreme like going entirely away from what we knew or certain situations, then we'll be able to find enough peace, at least, or something else to arise in us, so that we're not just being run by that fear. But first we have to be able to identify it instead of just being driven by it. And that's what most people, or many people, aren't able to take the distance from, because they are that fear, and that's how they're responding to their environment, instead of being able to sit back and look at it and see why you're feeling that.
Yeah, well, that's why I mentioned earlier training myself to take every single thing to a logical extreme. Because if I didn't imagine myself as dying in a gang fight or ending up in prison or addicted to drugs, then I wouldn't have had the motivation to change. And that's the thing about me that I've sort of realized. I imagine extremes. And that's both good and bad. I can imagine very horrible things and imagine ideal fantasies. And it's just a matter of choosing. Okay, which do I want? The worst case scenario or the best case scenario? And then once I choose the best case scenario, I simply decide how to implement it. I mean, it's almost as easy as, you know, going to your movie collection and saying, okay, on the right side, Disney, on the left side, Freddy Krueger. Which do I want to watch right now? And if you choose the Disney film, you know, Cinderella, that's one choice. If you choose Nightmare on Elm Street, that's the other choice. Both are possible. All you have to do is make the choice.
And both will profoundly affect your consciousness in the moment. So it's important to intentionally make that decision. That it's not just passing by you blindly, that you're taking it in and it's affecting your state of mind in that moment, what you're watching. And it's important to look at the things that we habitually take in and are drawn to, that we're creating that experience in ourselves over and over again. And that this is what we do in our lives. We make those choices.
Well, actually, the thing is, making a choice is the opposite of habit. When you do something habitually, you're not making a choice.
Did you say instinctually?
When you do something habitually, you're not making a choice.
Well, but choices become habits when you make them over and over again.
Well, they can be. In fact, there's a whole area of neuroscience that's about this, in fact, which I find quite fascinating. The choice you make arranges the patterns of your neurons to form a network, and as you make the choice over and over again, the pattern gets stronger and stronger so that it becomes nearly automatic. And as the choices get more dense, or as the pattern gets more dense with thousands or even hundreds of thousands of choices, it does become a habit in you. So you don't even have to think about it. So a chess master or a great musician has made the choice thousands of times to practice. So it becomes automatic.
Yes, I very much remember this image, actually, with the exact one you're describing in cognitive studies. I always imagine the engraving of the pathways even stronger, or I would see it in little lights of the neurons firing, that they just get stronger and stronger the more that you stimulate them. And so it's just they're waiting to go again and again to have these reactions. And you're right, we're practicing them. And which is also why we practice meditation and awareness and, in effect, making choices so that we have the ability to discern when we're making choices, that we're not forced into having these habits, that we can channel our neuronal hardware, if I can call it that.
Well, it's more like software, because even though the neurons are physical elements, you can't write them. The only issue is it takes two things to rewrite them. The first is a conscious awareness that you have been making a choice up to that point, and therefore you want to either continue making that choice or make a different choice. And then once you choose to change, you build in a routine that becomes your habit. And this brings me back to theater, because one of the things I've come to realize over the past few months is the brain is such an amazing instrument that it creates this sort of enclosed environment where your neurons form these patterns that become your personality, and it can easily remain fixed for the rest of your life without you even realizing that there's a difference out there, that there are different ways of thinking, different ways of being, different ways of feeling.
Mm.
And that is good if you are living in a healthy way. But if you're living in a way you don't like, it can be hard to change if you don't think change is possible. And so that's where theater comes in, because when you go into that space where you are opening yourself up for 2 to 3 hours to this new environment, you're suspending disbelief, you're opening your mind up to this new reality, and the theater can provide you with a sort of wake-up call of, here's a new pattern you might want to try. Because it shows you people who have developed this new pattern. Now, it can be an extreme pattern and an absurdist pattern, or it can be a viable pattern based on, say, someone's life, say a biopic or a historical play, or it can be an idealized model. So I've always turned to theater as my source for new information about how the world can work, which is why I also love writing, because writing is one of my ways of describing possibilities about how the world works and choices I might want to make. So that way I don't get stuck in my own patterns. I mean, you describe yourself as nearly being reborn every day. Rebirthing daily, as you say.
With every breath.
I mean, there's of course not a literal statement. You're not being reborn from your mother every day, but you seem to have a fresh perspective that allows you to question and re-examine your own patterns and allow you to make the choice to continue them or to change them every day.
Yeah, I feel changed by every person that I come across. Every student that sits down in front of me asks questions that many times, new questions that I haven't heard before. But often they're similar, but it's also fascinating to me that the answers I wind up giving are something I haven't said before. It's as if the interaction with this person, or feeling what their true question is, or maybe what their answer is, has stimulated some bit of knowledge in me that I hadn't discovered yet, that I was not attuned to before. And it may just, we each have a different experience, of course, of waking up each day, and I don't know how to see it any differently, but that it's all changed. It feels so remarkably new.
It's almost like you're describing yourself as the marble that Michelangelo described chiseling to get at the statue underneath. Except instead of, I mean, you are the artist, but it's also everyone you meet. You're choosing what to accept as an imprint or a chip on you to reveal the fine detail in your life. And so you're always revealing new things. There's always a potential inside of you that's being exposed as a reality. Actually, I wrote an essay about this back, I think, in the beginning of 2000. I realized that the human life can be a work of art itself. Even if you don't produce art necessarily, painting or acting, your life can be art if you allow other people to be the artists with your input. And it seems, at least to some extent, you are engaged in a somewhat collaborative process with other people putting their little chisel into your statue.
Absolutely. That's what being responsive is. If you really take a person in and listen to them and dare to look at them, you experience some of what they're feeling. Isn't that true? It seems inevitable that it rubs off on you in some way, that you learn something, a new way to be. And
that's what happens to me every time I do a show. I talked in the beginning about my flirtation with acting. And I have a deep appreciation of method acting, because even though I'm not a professional actor, I don't have any need to go and live life as a cop in order to play a cop. Nevertheless, I use my imagination to sort of recreate myself in the image of the person I'm talking to. So I'm taking on the role of my guest every single time I do a show. And I do this pretty much naturally with every person I meet. If I have enough information about the person, then I just reconstruct myself in that person's image and essentially turn myself into that person, just as an actor turns himself into the role that they're playing.
And what a wonderful opportunity you take then to not limiting yourself to what you've known up to this point, to be open enough and not afraid of what might happen if you step into those shoes, that you'll still be able to come back to what it is that we call Mariah, that is still there even after you've had this journey in this other mind or this other person.
Exactly, and I'm still trying to figure out what that Mariah actually is, because there's so much there that I haven't put all the pieces together just yet. It's easier for me to act like someone else, but I'm kind of doubtful someone else would act like me, because there's just so much me there. The essays, tweets, radio shows, hippie stuff, just so much. So I'm trying to figure out my own role at this point. But with that said, I have not gotten so far into roles that I'm unable to shake them off. Like with Dustin Hoffman and Rain Man, I think the story was he was even in character after the movie to some extent.
Yes. Well, that's simply true, that if you are shaping yourself and taking on the habits of a character, so to speak, you're speaking in the way that they do, and you've started moving in a different way because of this role that you're performing, that you're working on, the text that you're saying, those words that you're saying over and over again, that every time they come out of your mouth, you're having a new experience, and you're repeating it. And maybe you're having a similar emotion to last time, maybe something different, but it is changing who you are just by having this, by acting in this way, by taking this action, by saying these words. And it always changes you, every role you take on. And it can even be very difficult, depending on what role you're working on, what the situation is, if you have to confront these challenging feelings over and over again. But it's also an opportunity to feel them differently, or to try it in a new way and see what happens, and to do it in a safe environment.
Exactly. And that's why I give myself the 3 hours of the show every day to explore a new personality, to become that personality. And after 3 hours, I can go back to my own personality and do the things I enjoy. So it's always a experiment in live theater to some extent on these shows.
Absolutely. I heard when you said that before, and that is true. And yet I feel I have a very, for the moment, formed perspective of who you are. I very much feel the essence of Marriah through our conversation, and open to how that will change in the future through our future interactions.